talking with George Christie, the president of the Ventura County chapter of the
Yes.
Hells Angels. Also, way back in September 24th, 25th, arrested for what they call conspiring to murder a prison inmate.
Yes.
Okay, found not guilty, acquitted of all of this just recently.
That's correct.
Do you remember that date?
Oh, I do remember that date well. You know, it's funny, the jury was really upset, and they felt that the government, the FBI, had stepped away beyond their guidelines, and that they had more or less created this whole thing to frame me and get me incarcerated for a long period of time.
You know, I hear you speak, and certainly I'm not so naive as to think that nothing like this ever happens. But to have someone sitting here in front of me, and I know it must have affected your family life. I mean, you have a wife, you have children.
Well, you know, I've virtually had no family life. I was arrested. I made 3 attempts to get bail. What with this new Bail Reform Act, I was denied bail. We had offered $1 million worth of property, and the judge denied it under the 1984 Bail Reform Act. They said that I was a danger to society, and they weren't going to let me back out until after my trial. So, you know, I virtually had no family life. You know, my wife would come and visit me once a week at Terminal Island, bring my children down occasionally. So, you know, it really affected them quite a bit also.
Okay. We're going to continue with this discussion. And of course, the gist of it is that you were framed, and that we think sometimes that we live in a very idyllic society where nothing like this could ever happen. The fact is, it happened to you, and it could happen to anybody else, and I'm sure it has.
Well, you know, this is a great country, and I think the basic concept behind the Constitution and whatnot is great. We have a conservative rainstorm right now. That's what I like to call it, and it just seems to be eroding our constitutional rights. But I think the pendulum is going to swing the other way eventually, and things will work out again. You know, for people that think like myself, or anybody that wants to say exactly what's on his mind. You know, we shouldn't have to worry about what we say before we say it in this country.
I mean, that's supposed to be a guaranteed right. And basically, you received notice that you had to stop criticizing the government or any federal agency, and you went against it, so to speak. You said, I'm going to continue to voice my opinion. That's when things got muddy.
That's correct.
Supposedly, we paid $1,000 to have Mike Mulhern have Tom Cheney murdered. And of course, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but they went so far as to stage Tom Cheney's murder in the prison. They actually put him on a gurney, shut the yard down, and wheeled him out, brought in a ambulance and wheeled him out to the ambulance and loaded him in with a sheet over his head. So they went to all these elaborate things to get myself, along with Danny Fabricant, on this murder conspiracy thing. Mike Mulhern wanted to borrow some money, and we also, he was trying to sell us machine guns. And, you know, they said that that was ridiculous, but somehow, and I don't know where, I don't remember where, Barry Tarlow found a picture of Mike Mulhern holding a machine gun that he used to use when he would sell machine guns. So they said the money was for a murder contract. In reality, the money was for machine gun purchases. You know, were we breaking the law? Yeah, I guess buying machine guns is breaking the law. But it had nothing to do with a murder contract. The interesting thing was, we gave Mike Mulhern $1,000. Mike Mulhern only gave the FBI 500 of it and pocketed another 500. We made a big deal about that in the trial to attack his credibility. But, you know, Danny was really provocative. He'd say and do outrageous things. And we'd been in Terminal Island for approximately 6 months. And I had petitioned the warden. I petitioned the counselors. Anybody that hasn't been to prison, in federal prison, you have counselors. And like somebody you want to go complain to or whatever. So I'd been petitioning the counselor who was kind of in charge of the housing. You know, they put you in this cell or that yard. Danny was in solitary. They had him up on the upper tier in the solitary confinement. And I finally convinced this gentleman to let Danny out under my control. I guaranteed that he wouldn't do anything, any of his antics. And this is a true story. The day I went over to the solitary confinement area to wait for Danny to come out, the fellow that I'd been negotiating with came out, and he was beat red. And I said, "When's Danny getting out?" And he said, "Never." Danny had just talked all the prisoners in the upper tier to stuffing sheets into the toilets and flooding the lower tier in some sort of protest, I don't know what. And that was my last attempt to get Danny out on the yard. But Danny and I, we went to court every day, chained together. It was a really terrible ordeal. This is before the Metropolitan Detention Center was built. We were housed in Terminal Island Prison. We were, unsentenced prisoners, if you will. I mean, we walked the yard. I did. Danny didn't. But, and it was an interesting prison because it was also like in a reception center where they would relocate people. They also had a prison hospital there, not a big one, but a small one. And people were coming in all the time. So you would have 1 through 5, 5 being the most violent prisoners. And people would come in from a level 1 to a level 5, and they'd be out on the yard. And what would happen is, I know there was this one guy I met there, he was a Mexican mafia member. I kind of ran with him for 3 or 4 days. His name was Frog or Froggy, I can't remember. And he was a very dangerous character, and there was no computers back then. So you had to wait for the paperwork to catch you. So the prisoners would come to the receiving center, and they'd say, "Do you have any reason to be locked up?" Or, "No, everything, I'm cool, man. Put me in general population." And then they'd get to hang in general population for several days until their paperwork caught up with them. But you'd be out in the yard, you'd be hanging out with somebody, be a group of guys hanging out. And you have to understand, prisons were different in the 80s. It was kind of still the golden era of federal prisons, club fed. They had coffee machines. You could walk up to the coffee machine and put your quarters in and get a what we always called a Cadillac, coffee with cream and sugar. And it was just your coffee machine coffee. But I'll tell you, it was damn good coffee. And, we'd all stand around and share a cup of coffee together. The guys were smoking. This is before there was no smoking. The guys that couldn't afford cigarettes would get the issue from the government to roll their own. Very interesting little concrete society, if you will. But, Terminal Island was levels 1 to 5. I want to say 6, but I don't know. So nowadays it's, supermax, maximum, medium, and then, low level, and then you go out to your camps. When I was in prison in 2011, I was in La Tuna prison, and it was a low-level camp, but they ran it like a medium. Everything was controlled. All the movements were controlled. They had a flag out on the yard where they could test the wind velocity if they had to shoot somebody from the tower. Just very interesting for a low-level prison. But I think the reason they ran it like a medium, but it was classified as a low because they were all old prisoners. These were guys that had been in the system really a long time. And when I first got there, I still had my number from 1986. So some of the old school guys, they read your number. It's kind of like a description of how long you've been doing time. And some of the guys thought I'd actually been locked down since 1985. So when I hit the yard, it was like, whoa, this guy's been around a long time. I got a lot of respect from guys. I know there was a big Muslim contingency there, and they wound up being real friendly with me, which, they don't cross those color lines too much. But my barber was a black guy, and, he would come and visit me, but he wasn't allowed to step into our cell. We would put chairs outside. And when I would go to his cell, I wasn't allowed to step in his cell. His cellmates looked at me like, "Don't come in here," And so that it was still a color line there. was older prisoners, but they were still going by the politics of how the other prisons were run. And what would happen is these businessmen would come in there, and they'd wind up getting beat up or stabbed because they didn't understand the political standings of how to conduct yourself in a prison. You have some businessman come in there, and he's in there with guys that had started out from a penitentiary, and now they're doing time in a low-level prison. But these guys have a mentality of a penitentiary, and if you break the codes, you get dealt with. They don't give you any slack, and it's had some interesting things, happen out there. And there's very telling things when you're in a prison situation. I met an older guy that ran all the Mexicans from New Mexico. I don't know who he was, or I don't remember his name. He came and introduced himself to me. He worked in the chow hall, and the guys from New Mexico had a table. All the bikers had a table. All the what we called the paisas, the Mexicans, they had a table. Everybody had a table in there where they would eat, and you weren't allowed at that table unless you were invited or part of that little tip. But one morning I came in there, and he was sitting by himself, and I saw that. To me, right away, I knew there was a problem. I go, why is the leader of this crew sitting at a table by himself eating breakfast? And later that night, they stabbed him like 40 times. And this guy was so proud. Now, I don't know how deep the wounds were, but he would not get on the gurney. He walked out of the unit. That's the last time I saw him. He walked out of the unit. He was not going to get on that fucking gurney. No way. He said, I'm walking out. And, like I said, he was just an old school Mexican. Looked like he'd been down forever. I don't know what the problem was, but a new guy had come in, and some kind of political unrest caught up with him somehow, somewhere, for some reason.
Getting back to your particular case, so you're arrested, you're not allowed bail, your family sees you once a week. There came a time when they offered you a deal. They said, if you, admit that you're guilty, we'll trade, a life sentence for 20 years here?
Yes, they said that they would drop the life sentence and let me plead to an open 20 years. And I was also asked to become a federal informant myself. They wanted me to cooperate with them and give them information on the club. Apparently, I guess they would let me back out, and I would feed information back to them, which really upset me that they would even consider that I would do something like that. That was the last thing that I had ever considered, and it was a real insult to me when my attorney that I fired him after that conversation. But when he brought that deal to me, I was really upset. I went back to my cell, and I did a lot of contemplating and thinking, and all it did was just make me stronger.
Okay. We're going to take a break right after
Okay.
that last statement. We'll be back when asking a few more questions, a few more intimate questions about just what you went through and what you think of all of it now and what your plans are for the future. So you can contemplate that a little bit. We're going to go away for just a second. Come back.